Love how fast Jared Goff ran after he got into the end zone there. Let's get to starts and sits with Michael F. Florio. Go to NFL.com/startsit to see the full column, but we want to get the freshest information. We want a quarterback we can start and believe in. Who is it?
Look, we love quarterbacks who could run in fantasy, right?
That's true.
Justin Fields is elite when it comes to running, which is why he continues to be a great fantasy option. He is starting to look comfortable. Let's not forget, he was not the starter, or at least the planned starter, coming into the season, so it took him a couple of weeks, but he looks comfortable and is running more. He has over 50 rushing yards in 2 of his games and 3 rushing touchdowns in his last 2 combined. Plus, he threw for 300 yards last week. Like Patrick said earlier, him and George Pickens are really starting to develop chemistry there. And then the Cowboys defense is banged up. And if the Steelers are somehow playing from behind in this one, that's probably a good thing because dropbacks only mean more running for Justin Fields.
Yeah, so good, but Fields goes up, he becomes a starter. That means we probably got to put somebody good on the bench, Mike.
This is the spiciest quarterback sit article I've ever written for Stardom Situm, and it starts with Patrick Mahomes. He might be the best quarterback on the planet, but in fantasy, he is just a guy right now. I know the saying is start your studs, but he has topped 17 fantasy points once in his last 13 starts. Since the start of last season, he has reached 26 only one time, meaning the floor and ceiling are significantly lower than what we are accustomed to with Patrick Mahomes. If you covered the name and just looked at the numbers, you would have dropped him by now, let alone continue starting him. Plus, the Saints have allowed just 1 passing touchdown and have 6 interceptions this year. So I think you get away from Mahomes. And I told you it was spicy. I think you sit Kyler Murray in this one. Marcus touched on this earlier, but he is not only has he struggled against the 49ers, under 250 passing yards in his last 4 games against them with 3 touchdowns and 4 interceptions, he's kind of struggling in general right now. The Rams are the only team he has scored 15 fantasy points against this year. He scored a whole lot more than 15, but every other game he's been below that number. Last week, in the best possible matchup for a quarterback, he was held to single digits. Kyler doesn't look like Kyler right now, and because of the matchup, I think it's okay to get away if you have another option you like.
Those are 2 of the best fantasy quarterbacks of all time. So it's wild, the situations that both of them are in. Let's go over to the running back position. Who's a start?
I think you want to start Najee Harris. I know I had him as a start last week. He reached double-digit fantasy points. It was more of a floor game. But that's what I like about Harris. He brings such a safe floor. We know he's going to get at least 16 carries. He has hit that number in every game. But don't overlook the fact that he has 11 targets in his last 2 games, which is huge for his fantasy value. And this could be an upside week, as not only are the Cowboys extremely banged up on defense, but they have allowed a top 10 fantasy running back in 3 of 4 games, and they allow a lot of long runs as well. So he brings a safe floor, but this could be the week we see the ceiling.
All right, so Najee a start. Who's going to the bench?
I'm going to continue riding it. You sit Rachaad White right now until we see otherwise. Him and Bucky Irving split touches last week, but Irving is seeing the valuable goal line touches. And in his last 3 games, Rachaad White is averaging just 7.4 fantasy points per game. And most concerning of all, his target share is decreasing. In the last 3 weeks, it was just 10%. It was 20% in week 1. It was 13% last year. So that, plus the Falcons being a tough run defense on a Thursday night, I think you get away. And then Zach Moss. He came through last week if you started him. But if you watch the game, it was pretty ugly how he got there. He split carries and targets with Chase Brown, but Brown vultured those valuable goal line touches, and he turned them both into touchdowns. Plus, the Ravens. They have allowed the fewest rushing yards to running backs this year, and we have played a full month. They have not allowed a single carry to go for 10 or more yards this year. So he's going to have to really grind it out. I think this is a week where you can get away from Zach Moss.
All right, we've got wide receivers and tight ends coming up, but let's go to Marcus Grant for some sleepers.
Thank you, Patrick. Got some sleepers at the quarterback and running back position, and we're going to start down in Duval with Trevor Lawrence. And yeah, it has been frustrating. We are still waiting for Trevor Lawrence to become the prince who was promised. It hasn't happened quite yet, but this is a really good matchup for him. You saw at the top of the show that the Colts are one of the quarterback-friendliest defenses there is around. Look at the last couple of weeks. Indianapolis has given up 675 passing yards 312 of those were to Justin Fields. Yes, the same Justin Fields that Michael F. Florio just said is elite at running the football. He made it happen with his arm last week. So if there's a chance for the Jaguars offense to get healthy and Trevor Lawrence to get on the right foot, it could be this week against Indianapolis. Let's move over to the running backs. Javonte Williams. I have been a Javonte Williams stan for a long time, and the Broncos have made it hard on me. But this time, I'm choosing to believe against the Las Vegas Raiders. Williams leads the team in backfield snaps. He's getting the majority of the rush attempts and is still getting a lot of work in the passing game. He runs around on about half of Denver's dropbacks this year, a 20% target rate going against a Raider defense. It's allowing more than 5 yards per carry to running backs and almost 6 yards per reception to running backs. This might not be a high-scoring game, but I think Javonte is going to be heavily involved. If you want a deep sleeper at running back, go down to Atlanta. We got Tyler Algier. Now, look, starting him on a Thursday night might be a little bit dicey. We knew he was going to have a role in this offense. Yes, Bijan Robinson is far and away the RB1 in Atlanta, but Tyler Algier still getting on the field, still getting carries. Every once in a while gets the occasional target. If there is a way to get through this Saints defense, it might be on the ground versus trying to go through the air, especially for an offense that's struggling to push the ball downfield. Tyler Algier, some very deep sleeper vibes in week 5.
Time for more starts and sits at the wide receiver and tight end positions with Michael F. Florio. Let's start with the wideouts who we put in our lineups.
I'm still trying to get in the good graces of Wisconsin, so give me Jaden Reed.
Let's go, Matt.
And Dontavian Wicks. I think both of them should be in starting lineups this week. You see there, 30 fantasy points per game for Jordan Reed with Love as the starter. He's topped 130 yards and scored a touchdown in each of those games. But Wicks last week really caught my attention. 13 targets, 210 air yards, 3 end zone targets, just elite volume. And he has come through in the past when they need him to step up. And the Rams, top 10 in touchdowns and fantasy points per game allowed to wide receivers. They are going to eat. And then my guy Khalil Shakir against the Texans. He has been Josh Allen's top target in 3 straight weeks, and he has double-digit fantasy points in every game this year. So he brings a very safe floor. But I think this will be a ceiling game. The Texans have allowed 4 touchdowns and 112 passer rating when targeted to slot receivers. And look, there's a little extra incentive on both sides. This is going to be a high-scoring game, so I want exposure to both offenses in this one.
All right, where do you not want exposure? Who are you sitting?
I'm sitting T. Higgins against the Baltimore Ravens because Joe Burrow, who might also be a sit for me, you got to head over to NFL.com for that one, has averaged just 218 passing yards per game in his last 3 full games against the Ravens. The Ravens also have not allowed 15 fantasy points to any wide receiver in the last 2 games. Higgins has been very up and down against them in his career, but he has struggled against them as of late. You need to start Jamar Chase. You never pull him from your lineup, but a secondary option like Higgins in a matchup this tough, you can get away from.
Yeah, it's tough because people were waiting to get T. Higgins back. Let's go over to to a start at this tight end position. Who are we celebrating? Because it's tough. It's tough.
Oh, it's awful right now. So it is a welcomed addition to have Evan Ingram back and in our fantasy lineups. And if he starts for the Jags this week, he should be starting for you. It is a good matchup. As you see there, the Colts have allowed the 3rd most fantasy points per game to tight ends. They've also are tied for the most touchdowns allowed to the position. Last season, Evan Ingram averaged double-digit fantasy points against them, and he has at least 5 catches in every game he has ever played against the Indianapolis Colts. And they've allowed a top 2 tight end in the last 2 weeks. So matchup, volume, all of that, the state of the tight end position, you have to play him. You know who you don't have to play this week? Either of the Ravens tight ends. Mark Andrews has not scored a fantasy point since week 2. He has ran under 50% of the snaps and single-digit routes in each of the last 2 games. Isaiah Likely has 6 targets in his last 3 games. I'm trying to buy low on these Ravens tight ends because especially Andrews, eventually talent has to win out. But I don't want to start them until we see the usage change. And then this one might pain me. but my guy Kyle Pitts. You know how his birth certificate and arrest sheet are all you have to know that Henry Hill is alive? Well, a wide open touchdown and a long catch and run against the Chiefs is all you have to know that Kyle Pitts is playing football this year. It's not even an exaggeration. Just under 60% of his fantasy points this season have come on those 2 plays alone. The usage right now is dreadful, and until we see that change, you need to get away from Kyle Pitts if you have the availability.
You've been broken by the Atlanta Falcons. Something Falcons
Took 4
fans-
years.
Yeah, they're used to. It's a struggle. So sometimes we got to get some sleepers to make everything better. But fix us, Mark.
Didn't think we'd get a Henry Hill reference. I mean, as far back as I can remember, I always wanted to start Courtland Sutton. All right, maybe not. I know it seems weird that I'm touting as a sleeper a wide receiver whose quarterback struggles with the forward pass, but here we are in week 5. The thing I do like about Courtland Sutton is that they are trying to feed him targets. Now, whether they connect has been something of a different issue this season, but they're going against a Raiders secondary that has struggled over the last couple of weeks. Last week, 6 for 72 for Jerry Jeudy. Florio mentioned Amari Cooper had a long touchdown that was called back because of a holding penalty. The week before that, Deontay Johnson goes for $122 and a touchdown, including 203 yards after the catch for the Carolina defense. That part could be critical for Courtland Sutton because Bo Nix is not necessarily going to push the ball downfield, get him the ball in space, and let him work against the Raider defense. A tight end sleeper. It's Mike Gesicki. And look, I have sort of used Mike Gesicki as shorthand for tight ends that are generally unsatisfying in fantasy. But you look at the Bengals statistics this year, Gesicki is second to Jamar Chase in just about every major receiving category. Going against the Ravens defense that's allowed a top 12 tight end finish in 3 straight weeks. 2 of those weeks, Brock Bowers, Jake Ferguson both went for 90-plus yards. I don't know if Gesicki quite gets to that number, but I do think he's going to get heavily targeted, and volume could sort of win out the day. Looking for a deep sleeper as a pass catcher? Go to Kansas City. Noah Gray. Now, look, I think this offense is going to start running through Travis Kelce the way it has for many years before that, but Gray is that guy that they like to run up the seams. When you have Patrick Mahomes throwing it more downfield, Gray is a guy who's getting some of those opportunities. If he can find one of those in the painted area, which is pretty much all you're asking for from a tight end that you're streaming, could end up being a not bad day. I'm not going to say a great day, but a not bad day for Noah Gray in your flex spot.